Jeremy Hunt has hinted that any tax cuts in the budget will be made. You ready for this? Responsibly, as new polling today sees the Conservative support in one poll at its lowest level in more than 40 years.
Well, the Chancellor is reportedly considering further cuts to public spending to allow more tax giveaways, with Labour accusing the government of playing politics.
Joining us now, Conservative commentator, good friend of the show, Benedict Spence, and the Director of Politics at Ipsos, is that right? Research, Kieran Pedley. Kieran, Benedict, thank you. B, can we start with you? You're looking... I've obviously said it wrong. You two are laughing at me. Can I just... sorry. So the Tory party idea of responsible tax cuts is essentially, from what I'm reading, let's take some money off public services, which are in the toilet, right? We have no military. You can't see a doctor. There's people coming to this country who shouldn't be here and being put up in hotels.
Police not solving burglaries.
Police don't solve burglaries. We're skint. Why don't they just throw their hands in the air and go, listen, we're out of ideas, we're done? This is becoming almost farcical, isn't it?
I think they have kind of done that.
Yeah.
This is almost just a sort of appearance's sake. Anything that they do bring in any case, there isn't enough time left between now and the general election, whenever that is, I think, for people to feel any sort of benefits in their pockets. And I think it's more about the internal machinations of the Tory party itself. It obviously wants to be the party of low tax, which all obviously sounds very ironic given the circumstances. But they want to throw that to their core, to their base. Because partly, as much as anything else, I think we saw at the last set of by-elections, what they fear is not people crossing over to the Labour Party or Reform, it's just Tory voters not coming out to vote, because Tory voters are saying, well, there's nothing in this for me, there's nothing in it on the other side, but I'm just going to stay home come the general election. And I think it's a question of, if they want to make it respectable,
Is that their aim now, do you think?
I think it's damage limitation.
Because we had Jonathan Ashworth on, you would have been doing other stuff and didn't see it, but I mean, I talked to him and said to him, when you listen to the Labour Party talking about, you know, being on the dole for life isn't an option. When you hear about fiscal responsibility, I mean, talk about parking your tanks on somebody's lawn. It's almost as if the Tories have retreated. And I don't want to use a war analogy, but I don't feel that there's a vibe at all, man.
There's a real lack of enthusiasm, of confidence, of ideas. I think they feel very frazzled, very burned, actually, by the last couple of years and what's gone on. A lot of them are looking to leave. A lot of them don't actually intend to be MPs, whatever happens after the general election. And when that happens, actually, there is that sort of evaporation of any sort of gumption. And the Labour Party, you've got to be honest, actually, the Labour Party, they are planting the tanks on the lawn to a certain extent, but they're not doing it very enthusiastically, because they can see the serious economic situation that
can't promise too much, right?
Yeah, because this is the thing. So, as you pointed out, public services are doing appallingly, generally speaking, in this country. But the tax take is already at a post-war high. There's actually only so much, as we're saying, well, you can't cut taxes because services will suffer, there isn't actually that much more that you can increase taxes. Because the thing that a lot of people are not talking about is, I know people are saying, well, I want the NHS to work, I want the police to turn up, I want the schools to work, but actually people to live a life, to get on the housing ladder. Life is coming to a halt for a lot of people. They're having to sort of put it on hold. So actually, as much as, you know, everybody's saying, well, we can't cut taxes because we need to fund services, there's not actually a great deal that you can do on the other side as well.
Kieran, just want to bring you in now. Now, Rishi Sunak was initially rating a lot higher than his party. What's his current position in comparison to Starmer?
So you're right. I mean, when Rishi Sunak took over in October 2022, his poll ratings were above those of the Conservative Party. And the big question was going to be, would he be able to drag his party's ratings up to match his, or would his ratings fall to match his party's? What we found this month with our most recent Ipsos political monitor is that 73% of the public are dissatisfied with the job that Rishi Sunak is doing as Prime Minister. That gives him a net satisfaction rating of -54, which, you know, sounds low because it is. Liz Truss was on -51 before she resigned.
Wow.
Gordon Brown was on -51 in 2008. So you get the picture. There's less enthusiasm for Keir Starmer than maybe previous leaders of the opposition that have won from opposition, such as David Cameron or Tony Blair. But when you put them head to head, last month we found that Keir Starmer was seen as the more capable Prime Minister over Rishi Sunak by 13 points. So you hear this a lot. Not a lot of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer as an individual, perhaps, but there's certainly a sense that he's preferred as Prime Minister to Rishi Sunak at the moment.
And Kieran, how is this broken down in terms of demographic? Can you tell us what older voters are preferring and what the
That's
under
me.
under 35s are going for? We've heard this morning that support for the Tory party within under 35s is now at single figures.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. In your introduction, you mentioned that that the Conservatives won 20 points overall nationally, which is a record low going back to 1978 with Ipsos. And really, the best way to explain such a fall is that their support has fallen amongst just about everybody, whether that's older voters, younger voters, and so on. In single digits with those under the age of 35, that's true. I think what we're seeing is ultimately a bit of Conservative fatigue, if I can call it that. Right. The public tell us there are 4 key issues that they're most that motivate them most to vote. The NHS is number 1 at the moment, as you were alluding to earlier, but also the economy, the cost of living, and falling slightly further back, immigration, although that is particularly important to 2019 Conservatives that put the Conservatives in office under Boris Johnson. So the point is that the Conservatives are not seen as delivering on any of those topics, and what that ends up, what the case ends up being, that 69% tell us it's time for change next election. I think that's the real problem the Conservatives have, is to try and, if you like, change the public's mind on it being time for change. Once that sentiment takes hold, it's very, very difficult to turn it around.
Kieran, I think you've put that absolutely brilliantly. Benedict, he put it well, didn't he? Fatigue from 14 years, a feeling amongst the Tory. You said half of them don't want to stand. There's record numbers saying they're not going to stand. People's perception of things is once the tide is against you, it's very, very difficult to turn that around. And the months have made bad news. It gets worse and worse of a sudden. Can we just say something? And I thought she's mad. He's less popular than Liz Truss. Can we just get that out there? That's extraordinary, man.
Although, how long was Liz Truss Prime Minister
49
for?
days.
If she had 50 days, who knows? Maybe she'd have plumbed the same sorts of debt.
Well,
so but you're right. It is that sense of just exasperation, that nothing is improving. Anything that they propose, people just don't believe they're going to bring
I also said,
through.
I'd love your take on this, that I think that the British public are more switched on than maybe in the past, but this tax cut idea, people would have gone, absolutely, absolutely. I think more people now are going, yeah, but we're going to have to pay for it, and this is a bit short-term to get votes. I think people are more switched on. I'm not saying they're enthusiastic about politics.
I also think, though, when it comes to tax cuts, that the massive eating away of their wealth through inflation means that any amount of tax cut, people will just go, but this takes me back to where I was last year. Actually, I'm significantly poorer. You'd need to see a huge tax cuts, actually, for it to make a dent in people's pockets. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that in terms of stimulating growth, but what voters are clearly prioritising is not stimulating growth. Now, that's a very foolish thing, long term. I just have to be honest about that. You get the country you deserve if you don't want economic growth. You won't get the services that you want if you don't have economic growth. But people are saying right now, what's more important is that the services work up to a standard that I desire, rather than they work better in the future. So it is short-termism, actually, from the electorate, if I'm being honest, but that is what the voters want. And so the Conservatives are going to get punished for that, because they're not going to bring in massive tax cuts, because quite clearly there isn't the appetite for them, because what people want are the basics to just function. That is, of course, in itself an indictment of the Conservatives, that the tax take is at a record high and the services work less well than they did when the taxes were lower.
We had Jonathan Ashworth on the show earlier from Labour. He was making quite an impassioned plea to Rishi Sunak to call for a May election. What do you think the likelihood is of that happening?
Well, they're not going to do that whilst the country is still technically in recession. It's probably going to come out of recession. It's probably going to be quite a short one, so I can see it happening later on in the year. But also, as I say, right now, they are waiting for something miraculous to happen. They're waiting for a Hail Mary sort of situation. Because otherwise, they're going to lose very badly. And Rishi Sunak will be sitting here thinking, well, if I lose badly now or I lose badly in November, I get to be Prime Minister for a little bit longer.
That's really interesting, actually. Damage limitation, just very briefly, Kieran. Many people have said that to us over the last week. They're waiting for something from nowhere to turn the tide. It's just, without appearing cynical, he's been waiting 2 years, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think part of the problem the Conservatives have is the big public concerns at the moment, such as the NHS and the cost of living and these sorts of things, are very difficult to turn around quickly. So I think that's where the focus on tax cuts comes from, because that's a lever that the Conservatives can pull immediately overnight, whereas rising wages or cutting NHS waiting times takes a lot longer. The problem with tax cuts, of course, is that there are several different taxes, and we know that council tax is going up 5% this year.
I'm going to interrupt you, because we've just got You'll love this. Greg Hands, Minister for London and the Minister of State, has just said on Times Radio there will not be a general election in May. Stig said, are you ready for a May election if it comes? Do you think there is any sniff of actually there being a general election in May? And Greg Hands, for a politician, went no.
Well, it's not, what's not
Wow.
clear. What's not clear, though, is whether he was answering the first or the second question.
You're much more intelligent than me, absolutely, yeah.
Are you ready for a May election? No.
Is there going to be one? Not so sure.
I think perhaps he was answering both those questions. Well, thank you so much to
thanks, gang.
Benedict Spence and to Kieran Pedley from Ipsos.